This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Gunmen attack yet another college in Nigeria's Kaduna state, killing a student and kidnapping 8 people. G leaders begin day one of their summit with calls to address inequalities and pledge COVID-19 vaccines to poorer nations. And what's next for Africa's Sahel region after France announces end to anti-jihadist operation? Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi, and for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight, I'm alongside my colleague Uche, who has our business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Richard. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live, please. Zimbabwe moves to fix forex arbitrage by threatening to ban firms that engage in the practice. And Tunisia to gradually replace subsidies with direct support for the needy. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. So good to have you with us. Let's begin with significant news coming out of Nigeria, where 1 student has been killed and 10 other people abducted by gunmen at a polytechnic in Kaduna State, northwest Nigeria. The gunmen attacked the school around 10 p.m. Nigeria time on Thursday. Our correspondent Tessa McKinday reports.
Kaduna State Commissioner for Internal Security and Home Affairs confirmed the attack on Nuhu Bamali Polytechnic in the ancient city of Zaria. Samuel Aruan says among those abducted are 2 staff members of the institution and 8 students. Eyewitnesses say another student who was shot by the armed men is critically injured and battling bullet wounds in hospital. This is not the first time bandits have attacked an institution of learning in Kaduna State to kill and kidnap people. But the government says it remains committed to security of lives and property despite the situation. Kaduna is just one Nigerian state confronted with security challenges such as kidnapping for ransom. Tassim Akendi, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
And day one of the G7 Leaders Summit in the UK opened with calls for an orchestrated recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. At the summit in Cornwall, the UK pledged more than $600 million for girls' education. The move comes ahead of UK and Kenya jointly hosting the Global Education Summit next month. Other issues on the G7 agenda are COVID-19 and climate change, with protests taking place near the event. CGTN's Nawi Jarbakil has been following developments at the G7 Summit. He now joins us live from Cornwall. Nawi, thank you. As always, welcome to Africa Live. The British Prime Minister has opened with calls for an orchestrated recovery from the pandemic. What are the messages from the other G7 leaders?
Well, Richard, it's been a real show of force for these traditional allies here. It's all been pretty positive and pretty jovial. The scenes on social media, Emmanuel Macron posting a short clip of him and Joe Biden, the US president, having a quick chat together. Very little social distancing, not much mask wearing, and the pandemic looming over these discussions. Boris Johnson, as you mentioned, announcing a vaccination drive to try and get all of the world's population vaccinated by the end of next year, the end of 2022. That's high on the agenda. Climate change is another issue that these leaders are very, very concerned about. The choice of location here, a small coastal community on the south of England, chosen intentionally to try and raise awareness. There have been some protests here as well. International environmental group Extinction Rebellion, hundreds of them, people taking part in that. But really the leaders on the first day, the summit just winding down now. The talks have finished, we understand, and they've moved on to the Eden project in Cornwall, which is a big environmental project, very famous here in the UK, and they're going to have dinner with the royal family. So the Queen will be there, Prince Charles, his wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, and his son as well, Prince William, and his wife, Catherine Middleton. She'll be in attendance as well, signifying one of the rare opportunities for them to be involved as a relatively young couple at such a high-level meeting with these world leaders. Richard.
Now, there is a big pledge to share 1 billion doses of vaccines with poorer nations. But what are the leaders saying about how this will be done and when? What else can we say about African nations who are looking forward to what they will get from this summit?
Yeah, this is really important because the rhetoric sounds right. Boris Johnson pledging 100 million vaccines to this global effort of 1 billion vaccines. The US has pledged $500 million, half of that amount. But really the timing of these vaccinations is key. We heard from Seth Berkley, the head of the Global Vaccine Alliance, who said this isn't something that can wait several months. It can't wait until the end of 2022. These vaccines need to be rolled out now. Linked to that, the World Health Organization's special envoy on COVID-19, Dr. David Navarro, he's also come out with some concerns, saying that this shouldn't be a case of charity, the way this is the G7 group of rich nations. They represent around half of the world's economic output. Nabarro from the World Health Organization saying that this isn't something that should be seen as charity given to countries. In actual fact, these vaccines being shared will benefit all of humanity. It will benefit all of the countries, including the ones represented here at the G7. Just moving aside to what else Africa can look out for, the climate change will be a really, really important issue, but lots of other issues. Don't forget, this isn't just about the 7 leaders meeting with the other invited guests, 4 additional countries, including South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa here in Cornwall as well. But this is about bilateral meetings, one-on-one meetings. The UK and Italian leaders met earlier and they discussed events in Libya. So those sorts of issues, Somalia as well, recent elections in Somaliland, those will all creep up. But more broadly, the education pledge is a really important one for Africa. I think this $607 million announced by the UK to try and educate more girls, to get them into school. According to the UK government in their release that they sent to us, if a child's mother can read, they're twice as likely, that child, to go to school, and 50% more likely to be immunized. And obviously the money that will be given in aid from the UK is going to the Global Partnership for Education, which works in 76 countries, including many in Africa.
Nawi Jabakil, thank you so much for your insight and analysis. We appreciate it. Earlier, we spoke to Chris Asike, a professor of African politics and development at the University of Pretoria, on what the continent should expect from the summit.
Africa should be supported by the G7 to produce vaccines for Africa, in the continent. It should not just be donations such as we've heard from the US president. There should be an agreement to allow Africa to produce vaccines that it needs if the idea of vaccinating the entire world is to materialize as the G7 expects. The G7 always presents an opportunity for discussion and decision on global collective action and cooperation. As President Ramaphosa of South Africa has been at the forefront of advocating for, vaccine availability in the continent through the COVAX in Africa. He is well placed, given his last representation or the last leadership of the African Union in 2020, where he was very frontal in advocating for, dealing with the vaccine shortages and ensuring that we produce vaccines in Africa. South Africa is also leading in that regard. So he's well placed, he understands it, and he will not just speak for South Africa, he will be speaking for the whole of Africa. And I think that that is a very good opportunity for him to make the case to the G7. Africa and the G7 have always partnered on issues that affect the continent, and there have been some successes. From the late 90s, G7 diplomats have worked through key issues, such as Cold War era deaths, communicable disease, and the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals there. And some other key successes they've had, from the past were around debt relief or debt reduction, around diseases like AIDS and malaria, transparency in the extractive sector. These are some of the examples, especially between the G7 of 2002 in Canada and through to the one in Japan in 2008, before we had the global economic crisis. There has been some successes, but there have also been, failures. The problem is usually around the lack of continuity in leadership in these countries, including in Africa. So we will need to have committed leaders both in Africa and the G7.
The U.S. and China's top diplomats held phone talks on Friday after recent frictions on bilateral ties. Both sides agreed cooperation is the right direction. Erhard Vermaak has more.
China's Party Central Committee Politburo member and senior diplomat Yang Jiechi has held a phone call with U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. During the call, Yang said that China and the U.S. should work together to get bilateral relations back on the right track. Bilateral ties between the two sides have seen bumpy development in recent months. The U.S. announced a multi-billion-dollar bill to give a boost to its tech companies, with the aim of being able to compete with China in this area. Meanwhile, 3 U.S. senior politicians visited Taiwan last week. In his words with Blinken, Yang reaffirmed the One China principle and urged the U.S. to exercise prudence in Taiwan-related affairs. For his part, the U.S. Secretary of State reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to the principle. Yang also expressed China's concerns and objections in regards to the spread of the lab leak theory by some in the U.S., calling on the American side to respect facts and science and focus its efforts on international cooperation in fighting the pandemic. The Biden administration has ordered the Federal Bureau of Investigation to look into the origins of the pandemic after a U.S. intelligence report reignited interest in the lab leak theory. Beijing has urged the U.S. to stop politicizing the hunt for the origins of the coronavirus. When speaking of multilateralism, Yang Jiechi said there is only one type of multilateralism on this planet, and it's based on international laws and regulations set by the United Nations, rather than on politics of certain groups or benefits of certain cliques. Blinken said the U.S. hopes to maintain communication in important international and regional matters with China. The phone call was made as the leaders of the G7 countries meet in the UK. Erhard Vermaak, CGTN.
Ethiopian officials say the United Nations announcement about a looming famine in Tigray is not only a fabrication, but also self-defamation. The Ethiopian government has been working with the UN to deliver humanitarian assistance in the region. However, aid agencies have been calling for unimpeded access and urgent funding. Here is CGTN's Garum Chala with more.
The UN insisted that Ethiopia risks sliding into the worst famine seen since the 1980s, claiming 5 million people need food assistance in northern Ethiopia. Ethiopian authorities were quick to react and said this simply is a result of a reckless analysis of the situation in Tigray. They further said this is a fabricated claim which has nothing to show for. Ethiopia, alongside the UN humanitarian agencies, have repeatedly reported collaboration in Tigray when it comes to the delivery of food for the needy. And just recently, out of the 96 local administrations in Tigray, only 16 of them were being covered by Ethiopia, and the rest, close to 80, are under the UN's Relief Services coordination. When asked if this coordination has worked or not, an official from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs said, "The famine is looming in Tigray report by the UN is like defaming its own work and admitting that perhaps its duties in the region have failed." Still, aid agencies say farming in Tigray is disrupted and people are evicted because of months of fighting between the Ethiopian government and TPLF in Tigray. Addis Ababa says selected seeds and fertilizers are delivered, health institutions are opened, and the situation is being properly addressed despite recurrent challenge. Group Dala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
France's military operation battling jihadists in the Sahel region of West Africa is coming to an end. French President Emmanuel Macron made the announcement Thursday, saying that soldiers will operate as part of broader international efforts in the region. CGTN's Ross Cullen reports.
The Sahel region of Africa, a vast, loosely governed area of the southern Sahara Desert. Fighting broke out there in 2012 when extremist armed groups captured swathes of territory in northern Mali. Thousands of soldiers and civilians have died, and more than 2 million people have been displaced since the conflict began. French troops have been trying to push the rebels back since 2014, and that mission is now ending.
L'état final recherché.
The desired result is obviously to reduce our multiple points of contact and to reduce external operations. We will continue the fight against terrorism with special forces, obviously with a strong French component, with several hundred soldiers and African, European and international forces at our side, but with a will to carry out strictly counter-terrorism interventions.
Encore plusieurs centaines de soldats.
More than 5,000 French soldiers are deployed across the 5 countries in the G5 Sahel group, working with the local forces in Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger and Chad. The French president did not mince his words in his official statement. He said that France could not secure some areas in the Sahel that will then just fall back into instability because regional partners decide not to fulfill their responsibilities. French troops will not pull out entirely, and some will remain to operate as part of broader international efforts in the region. Some opposition MPs in France are demanding a debate on the move, and the government will, at the very least, have to officially table its plan in Parliament. Regional political turmoil has also concerned France. In May, Mali suffered a second military coup in 9 months. And France's longtime ally, Idriss Déby, the former president of Chad, died in office in April from wounds sustained on the battlefield. The Sahel announcement coincided with the French foreign minister's visit to West Africa. The former colonial power has claimed some success against militants in recent months. But the situation remains fragile, France has grown frustrated, and the end of its major military mission in the Sahel is the outcome. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. Uganda hospitals struggling to cope with coronavirus patients as infections surge. And Zimbabwe has said it is not ready to take a consignment of 3 million doses of the Johnson Johnson COVID-19 vaccine.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent, to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. I'm Richard Nta. Chinese President Xi Jinping has signed the country's first law that aims to counter sanctions by foreign governments. Wang Haiyang reports.
The law comes amid rising tensions with Western countries over issues like those in Hong Kong and Xinjiang. China says the legislation aims to protect its national sovereignty and the legitimate rights of its entities.
For some time now, out of political manipulation and ideological bias, some Western countries have used Xinjiang and Hong Kong-related issues as part of their pretexts to spread rumors, smear, contain, and suppress China. In particular, the countries, in violation of international law and basic norms governing international relations, have imposed so-called sanctions on relevant Chinese state organs, organizations, and functionaries according to their domestic laws, grossly interfering in China's internal affairs.
The law enables China to take counteractions if foreign countries impose sanctions on Chinese citizens and entities. The target group of countermeasures does not only include those who are directly involved in imposing sanctions on China, but also their families and related organizations. Those targeted can be refused entry into China, restricted or even prohibited from doing business in the country. But analysts say China will continue to protect the legitimate rights of foreign investors and foreigners in the country.
It should also be clear that the piece of legislation shows China would not impose countermeasures unreasonably. The law stipulates that only necessary and reasonable measures would be taken, and only onto targeted entities and persons. For other parties that have ties with China, China will keep on protecting the legitimate rights and interests of foreign investors and foreigners, and building a market-oriented, internationalized business environment based on the rule of law.
The law was approved by China's legislature, the National People's Congress, Thursday. Wang Haiyang, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Zimbabwe's President Emerson Mnangagwa has congratulated the Communist Party of China on its 100th anniversary via the China Media Group. Mnangagwa highlighted China's growing support for Zimbabwe's economic development, saying Zimbabwe is grateful for the booming cooperation with China under the CPC's leadership.
The strides that the Communist Party of China has achieved is tremendous. It is beyond belief. Only people like myself really do understand that the Communist Party of China remained focused in making sure that they save and uplift the lives of the people of China. And this they've achieved. We believe that it is critically important for political parties to address their domestic challenges on the basis of available resources, both in terms of material and human capital domestically. And of course, without ignoring bringing into play technology and skills from outside. But according to the Chinese approach, the development must be characteristic to the environment of China. So this, the Communist Party has kept. So credit must be given to the leadership of the Communist Party from the beginning to the present.
Hospitals in Uganda are struggling to cope with a surge of new COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours. The country has recorded close to 1,500 new cases. Both the government and private health facilities have run out of space for patients, especially those needing intensive care services.
Ugandan authorities say centers across the country are overwhelmed with patients, and some people have died without receiving medical care. Uganda is battling a more aggressive second wave of the pandemic. Doctors say it's highly infectious, especially among the younger population. The country has registered more than 7,000 new cases in the last 7 days.
The current COVID situation is not good at all. Mulago Hospital is full. We are only admitting severe and critical cases. We cannot take in mild and moderate cases. Many of these are encouraged to go on home-based care, or if they are willing, we can take them to our facility at Nambole. The health workers are doing their best to save lives, but again, Ugandans need to know that with this very bad second wave, if we don't adhere to the standard operating procedures, the situation can only get worse.
Uganda has so far registered close to 57,000 cases and more than 400 deaths, according to figures from Ministry of Health. The demand for vaccines has more than doubled, but the country is running short of jobs, following supply challenges across the world. Some countries like the United Arab Emirates have banned travelers from Uganda. Rwanda's national carrier, Rwanda Air, has also stopped flights to the country's Entebbe International Airport. Uganda's President Yoweri Museveni recently announced a partial lockdown of the country to control the spread of the virus. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Zimbabwe has said it is not ready to take a consignment of 3 million Johnson Johnson COVID-19 jabs, and that's despite concerns over a vaccine shortage in the country. Correspondent Farai Wakatuya has the details.
Zimbabwe's government says it still has to put up cold chain facilities to handle the Johnson Johnson vaccine and prepare to manage potential adverse side effects it may cause before taking delivery of the doses allocated under the AU COVID-19 vaccination program. However, medical experts point out that the vaccines currently being administered are stored at similar temperatures, but do acknowledge vaccination rollout is highly complex.
From our point, Johnson Johnson is not that difficult to store, 2 degrees to 8 degrees. But the problem, the logistical issue comes to information dissemination, logistics of managing as a different vaccine from what we have been managing. Look at acceptance issues. Yes, people could accept it. Look at training. Look at registration of the vaccine. Look at the paperwork that is required to safely deliver. Look at the adverse events following vaccination reporting. It's a whole new thing that will need to be put up.
Medical experts also called for continued engagement with the government.
I think we need to advocate as the association to the government to say, come on, let's discuss this. While we agree, focus on bringing in Sinovac, COVAX, which are already in use, but let's not close the door on Johnson & Johnson.
Zimbabwean authorities have given assurances that its vaccination effort will not falter despite dwindling stocks, which have seen some people, especially those seeking their first jabs, being turned away.
On Tuesday, Cabinet announced that 500,000 vaccines are expected in the country by June 15th, while on Wednesday the country received its first 25,000 doses of the Russian Sputnik V vaccine, one of 4 shots that are approved for use here. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Nearly 90% of African countries will miss a target of vaccinating at least 1/10 of their population by September this year. And that's according to the World Health Organization, which says that more than 200 million vaccine doses are urgently needed to meet the deadline. CGTN's Daniel Arab Moy reports.
The World Health Assembly announced last month a new target for Africa's vaccination drive. WHO's highest health policy-making body set a target of 10% vaccination goal in Africa.
There is a global push to fully vaccinate 10% of the population in every country by September. And to reach this goal, Africa needs an extra 225 million doses. This will really require a massive effort, as our early projections indicate that without a significant boost in the availability of vaccines, only 7 African countries will achieve this goal.
According to WHO, the COVID-19 pandemic is trending upwards in 10 African countries. The World Health Body has recommended a change in strategy to deal with the fast-spreading virus.
By shifting strategies, countries such as Côte d'Ivoire have increased their vaccine uptake. WHO recommends expanding vaccination campaigns outside of major cities, increasing funding for delivery and improving staffing, as well as rolling out measures to improve vaccine confidence among communities.
WHO says just 2% of the continent's nearly 1.3 billion people have received their first dose.
As Africa closes in on 5 million cases and a looming third wave, there are growing fears that many vulnerable people could get exposed to the virus unless they get the much-needed vaccines. Daniel Arab Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Botswana's President Mokwetsi Masisi is in Tanzania, where he has met with his counterpart, Samia Suluhu Hassan. The visit aims to strengthen cooperation in economic diplomacy, defense matters, and sharing experiences in mineral extraction, among other agendas. CGTN's Chao Mgono reports.
The two presidents met in Dar es Salaam State House to discuss bilateral relations. Tanzania says that it is ready to learn from Botswana's vast experience in the agricultural sector and its utilization of natural resources.
Kama mnavyofahamu, Botswana inasifika kwa kupiga.
As you know, Botswana has great economic success in Africa, and Botswana's important economic sector is minerals, particularly diamonds, whereby it is leading in the purchase of diamonds in the world. But it is not just leading by coincidence. Botswana is organized and has a set of good strategies. We have learned a lot from them and have agreed with our team of experts to go there to learn strategies to promote our country's minerals for the business.
Tanzania and Botswana have already been cooperating in various investment sectors. Recent figures shows an increase in imports and exports between the two nations. The figure has risen from close to $340,000 in 2015 to approximately $1.5 million in 2020. As a way to promote more business, investment, and other economic opportunities, the emphasis is now on supporting each country's efforts towards development.
And I'm also coming to confirm to be the defender, protector, motivator, supporter, and ensurer of the success of President Hassan.
This visit has further paved way for the restoration of the country's Joint Permanent Commission that was formed in 2002. The commission will promote more areas of cooperation between Tanzania and Botswana and other SADC member countries. Chao Mgono, CGTN.
All right, time now for our business segment, and it's over to you, Uche.
Thanks, Richard. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. Zimbabwe moves to fix forex arbitrage by threatening to ban firms that engage in the practice. And Tunisia to gradually replace subsidies with direct support for the needy.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Zimbabwe, where authorities have threatened to ban firms that exploit the gap between the official and parallel market exchange rate from a weekly currency auction. Now, this follows a statutory instrument which was passed recently and aimed at tackling abuse of foreign currency acquired through official channels and later traded on the street. From Harare, here's Farai Makutea with the details.
Zimbabwe launched a foreign currency auction in June 2020 to try to tame a volatile black market and to ease access to forex for importers.
And what we decided on in the Reserve Bank was it would be a Dutch auction. So we put a certain amount of foreign exchange, $35 million, on the auction each week, and then people bid for it, and we accept the highest bids. And what you do is you simply go to your bank. You simply have enough foreign local currency to buy whatever you want to do. Your bank then may you tell your bank to bid for so much at such a price.
The weekly auction is credited with stabilizing the Zimbabwe dollar, but because demand for foreign currency continues to outstrip supply, the gap between the official and black market exchange rate has progressively widened, creating arbitrage opportunities which some rogue dealers have latched onto.
The abuse is when somebody goes and applies for foreign currency at the auction, supposedly to fund imports, and then they don't go and then pay for those imports. They then direct it to the parallel market. That goes against the letter and the spirit of the whole auction process. The other form of abuse is where they abuse the auction process by bringing in overstated invoices from their suppliers, who may happen to be parent companies or related companies.
Government has recently introduced legislation to punish errant players, but some fear this could upset the recently achieved stability. However, others feel the measures are necessary.
Consumers, ironically, have also benefited because those who were abusing the loopholes would need to go to the market and attract customers by way of low prices. So it's like akin to buying stolen goods. When you buy stolen goods, the prices are bound to be cheaper than those who are not stealing. But when the stealing stops, prices are bound to go up.
And it's certainly shaken things up. People are much more careful now about applying. Their documentation has to be legitimate. They have to be legitimately in business. They have to be importing real stuff.
Government has been urged to supplement the tighter controls by increasing the amount of foreign currency availed on the auction. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Now, Uganda joined other East African states to present budget estimates for the financial year 2021 and 2022 on Thursday. The $13 billion budget focuses allocations on national security, infrastructure development, health and economic recovery. Now, economic experts, however, worry that risks associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change shocks may affect the government's plans. Here's CGTN's Michael Baleke reporting.
Defense and security have been allocated $970 billion, the lion's share of the budget. Road construction comes next with an allocation of more than $880 billion. The health sector, that runs the country's COVID-19 emergency plans, will receive more than $340 billion. Some of this money will fund the ongoing COVID vaccination program.
What is coming will go a long way in bridging the gap, especially for those who are scheduled to receive their second doses. And when we get the 9 million doses, then we'll cover a bigger percentage of the population.
Uganda is currently battling the second wave of the pandemic and has registered a sharp rise in new infections, especially among the young population. But despite the coronavirus pandemic, the government says Uganda's economy has remained resilient and is on a recovery path. Figures announced during the budget speech show the size of the economy has grown significantly in the last 5 years, from $31 billion in 2016 to $40 billion in 2021.
Boosting business of the private sector, especially micro, small and medium enterprises, by extending COVID-19 relief measures, increasing regional and continental market access to long-term affordable capital, and supporting entrepreneurial development.
The other priority sectors for the government this year will be funding agriculture, trade, tourism, and wealth creation programs for young Ugandans. Some economists here say the budget does not reflect the aspirations of the majority of Ugandans. They argue the budget is more consumptive than productive, and that the government will need to take on more money in order to fund its activities. Uganda will be spending 38% of the budget on debt repayments. Economic analysts argue that the economy has contracted and is not strong enough to generate the required domestic revenues.
The only measures that Uganda government is using to get enough resources is through taxes. And taxes actually which are more of now choking, taxing the businesses out of business.
But the government is confident that the recent signing of agreements leading to the development of the country's oil and gas resources will help Uganda to fast-track its debt repayment. Michael Baleke, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And Sudanese blocked streets in Khartoum with burning tires on Thursday to protest a government decision which scrapped subsidies on petrol and diesel that led to doubling of prices. Now, the price of gasoline will now rise from 150 Sudanese pounds, which is about $35 per litre, to 290 pounds, or about $68. This, of course, is the latest in reforms by Sudan's transitional government, which vowed to fix its economy. Meanwhile, Tunisia has announced that it will gradually replace subsidies with direct support for the needy. It is all part of reforms needed to secure financing from the International Monetary Fund. Now, the North African nation also plans to cut the public sector wage bill, which is amongst the highest in the world. Here's CGTN's Adnan Shaushi reporting from Tunis.
Tunisian authorities have said that redirecting the subsidies is a necessary operation amid an ongoing economic crisis that has been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Tunisia subsidizes vegetable oil, bread and many other food products as well as energy. The move to redirect the subsidy is part of the structural economic reform program which has been developed by the Prime Minister's economic advisors.
The government will redirect the subsidy to those who need it the most. All poor, average income, even above average income families will get the subsidy. Anyone who needs and deserves state support will get it. Redirecting subsidy will better serve the population.
Economists say the reforms to cut subsidies would involve first phasing out food subsidies and then gradually ending subsidies for electricity, water and petrol. Tunisia is currently seeking a $4 billion loan program from the International Monetary Fund. Cutting subsidies is part of the recommendations of the IMF.
The state aims to enact economic reforms to reduce chronic fiscal deficits. These measures are urgent. There are other midterm reform plans which take into consideration the IMF's program. Tunisia cannot revive its ailing economy and seek foreign loans without showing the concrete results of its reform plan.
Tunisian authorities say the economic situation facing the country over the last decade has been difficult and has worsened by the COVID-19 downturn. Therefore, the next reforms will be very painful. One of the main axes of these reforms is restructuring state enterprises, their operation mode and their ability to generate profits.
It's time for real economic redress. The government needs to explain the reforms to the population. We can no longer talk about salary hikes and state spending without production and productivity. Tunisia's financial resources have doubled over the last decade, but the public sector wage bill and expenses are still too high.
Prime Minister Hisham Meshishi promised that his government will not initiate reforms without the agreement of various parties, including national organizations such as the Tunisian General Labour Union and the Tunisian Confederation of Industry, Trade and Handicrafts. Many Tunisians believe that the subsidy system, which was put in place in the 1970s, has always improved the purchasing power of millions of people. However, economists warn that this costly system is no longer efficient after 1 decade of economic difficulties and social unrest. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
And Tesla has unveiled a high-performance version of its Model S at its U.S. factory in Fremont, California. The automaker aims to reignite interest in the nearly decade-old sedan and fend off rivals such as Porsche, Mercedes-Benz and Lucid Motors in the luxury electric vehicle market. Now, CEO Elon Musk drove onto the stage in the new model today. It is priced at just under $130,000 against nearly $80,000 for a long-range Model S. The latest price for the Model S Plaid is $10,000 more than what was displayed on its website. Of course, Tesla redefined electric cars in 2012 when it launched its high-end Model S with a sleek design and long driving range, but it is facing a raft of new challenges.
This is nine years since we delivered the first Model S, the first car produced here in Fremont, so almost a decade. And I think we're really taken it to a whole new level with Plaid. We've managed to break the 2-second barrier, if you will. No production car has ever done 0 to 60 in under 2 seconds. So in addition to a crazy performance, it's also got a longer range. Even with the tri-motor high performance, it's got almost a 400-mile range. And in the dual motor configuration, it's got a 412-mile range. So 420, give or take. So that joke will never end.
And that's where we'll leave it on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, South Africa's Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan says that a consortium will take a 51% stake in South African Airways and inject over $221 million into the airline. All that are coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Uche. Don't go away. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a peek at the headlines.